Greetings, everyone, and welcome to our Eckerson Group Community Forum. I'm Jed Somerton, VP of Consulting for Eckerson Group, and I'll be your host and moderator today. And speaking for all of us at Eckerson Group and TIBCO, our sponsor today, we hope that you are staying safe and staying sane in our current health environment. While you're safe, we are glad you're able to join us today. This is our third community forum, a special type of webinar that we've designed for interaction with our audience, which means you. Our forums discuss unique topics that are critical to modern data-driven organizations, and our panelists are all experienced practitioners who have lived through and helped shape some of the most valuable analytics solutions in the world. Let me start by saying that we have designed our community forum to be a bit different from a standard webinar in 3 ways. Our lead-in presentation will be short, about 15 to 20 minutes. It's intended to identify some key insights and issues, pose some leading questions, and propose a path towards solutions. We welcome comments and questions from the audience throughout our time together. I'll cover the logistics in just a minute. And this forum is a partnership between Eckerson and TIBCO. We don't always have a vendor sponsor, but we're privileged to have Sean Rogers joining us today. As you can see, today is part of a series of forums with the goal of leading you to a 2020 vision with data and analytics. Last month, we talked about bringing business and IT together, and today we're talking about how to succeed with self-service analytics. And you can see our future plans, and we also want to hear from you if you have a topic that you would like us to cover. Before we jump in, first let me introduce you to the Eckerson Group. We are a full-service analytics organization with 3 major business units. Our research division stays abreast of best practices, trends, and technologies to provide guidance for analytic leaders to move forward. Our consulting division works with commercial, nonprofit, and government organizations to apply those best practices to use data and analytics to improve their performance, and our education division provides on-site courses and workshops for clients to develop new analytic capabilities. Here's a list of the companies we've had the honor and privilege to serve recently, and each one uses analytics in a unique way, using analytics to strengthen its business strategy. Turning now to our forum, please note that we offer a free companion report for you to download and consume at your leisure. The report goes into more detail in some areas that you may find particularly relevant. It's posted on our website, and after our discussion, you will receive links to it and to the recording of this session. And lastly, I'd like to thank TIBCO for sponsoring this forum. TIBCO software unlocks the potential of real-time data for making faster, smarter decisions. Its connected intelligent platform seamlessly connects any application or data source, intelligently unifies data for greater access, trust, and control, and confidently predicts outcomes in real time and at scale. You can learn more at tibco.com. Now let me introduce our panelists. First, our presenter, Wayne Eckerson, is founder and president of Eckerson Group. I'm betting that he's familiar to many of you, having led research at TDWI for many years and authoring 2 books on data and analytics. In case you were wondering, Wayne is also active in our consulting division, where he leads our most complex and challenging assignments. So he knows what the real world looks like, up close and personal. Our lead panelist today is Sean Rogers. Sean is Vice President of Analytics Strategy at TIBCO, and he's an internationally recognized thought leader, speaker, author, and instructor on the topics of IoT, big data, analytics, cloud, data warehousing, and social analytics. His latest book is Analytics: How to Win with Intelligence, and was published in July of 2017. He has more than 20 years of hands-on IT experience. Prior to joining TIBCO, he held senior positions at Quest Software and at Dell, and at a leading analyst firm. I, Jed Somerton, will double as moderator and panelist, contributing my experience as a longtime data and analytics consultant and former VP of Data and Analytics in a Fortune 200 healthcare provider. Now some logistics. Before Wayne sets up our discussion with some background and perspectives, I'd like to cover a few basics. We intend for the presentation to identify some key insights and issues and pose some leading questions. But we're not offering prescriptions here because your environment is unique, and we'd like to hear from you. To that end, we'll take a few polls during the webinar, and we'll also report out the results. We welcome comments and questions from you, the audience, at any time. If you have a question or idea to contribute, send it to me by using the Q&A box at the bottom center of your window. You don't have to wait for Wayne to finish or for a panelist to finish speaking. Lastly, if you have any challenges with Zoom audio or video, use the chat function to send a message to our webinar admin, Deborah Perrier. Thank you for joining. We're glad to have you, and we look forward to today's live production. Over to you, Wayne.
Well, thank you, Jed. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. I've been studying self-service analytics for probably about 20 years, writing, speaking, and consulting about it. And what on the surface seems like a pretty straightforward proposition, a win-win one at that, is actually quite complex in reality. It engenders a whole bunch of organizational, process, and architectural issues that need to be mastered to really succeed. So as Jed mentioned, we like to get you involved in these community forum webinars. So we'd like to do a poll right now. So Deb, can you introduce our first poll, which I think has 2 questions in it. Okay, first question, how would you rate the success of your self-service analytics initiative? Select 1, great, good, okay, fair, or poor. And the second question, what are the biggest challenges you face with your self-service initiative? Select all that apply. Report sprawl, conflicting metrics, adoption tools, data access and permissions, or other. I know the list is really long, so I suspect other will win. So we'll give you a couple seconds to answer those. Well, great. Why don't you put your answer in if you haven't yet? And Deb, why don't you show us the results very quickly? All right, in terms of success for your self-service analytics initiative, the plurality are saying okay. About 17% said good, and about 36% are saying fair or poor. In terms of the biggest challenges, adoption by far and away with 60% of the votes is the biggest challenge, but the others are close behind as well. So thank you very much, and we may bring that up later in the show here. And as Jed said, please get your questions ready. We expect that there'll be a lot, and we'd like to try and leave enough time to answer all of your questions, as well as have the panel comment on what I've presented, as well as what they're seeing in the polls. Okay, here's our latest maturity model for data and analytics. We've been in this space long enough to see that there have actually been 3 epochs or eras. The first being business intelligence, an era that is report-driven from 1990 to 2005. The second being self-service intelligence, which is the top of our presentation today. And the third, which we are just entering now, artificial intelligence, where decisions are AI-driven. And you can see some of the characteristics below. You know, we're moving from using data to analyze what happened in the past, to what's happening now, to what may happen in the future. We're going from reports that are IT generated to business generated to machine generated, and so on and so forth. I won't read through all of those, you can yourself. What I really wanted to talk about with this slide is that the keys to master each of these stages in your data analytics journey. In our consulting practice, we find that most companies are still struggling to get out of the business intelligence era. And the keys here to master this phase are getting your hand around data quality, mastering data integration, pulling data from multiple sources into a data warehouse or data mart, standardizing KPIs to create core dashboards for each department and the enterprise as a whole. It seems simple enough, and we've been at this for 30 years almost, but that's not easy to do. Now, in the era of self-service brings the whole litany of other challenges, and this actually forms the outline for what we're going to talk about today. So I think to really master self-service, you need a federated organization, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means. You really need to dig in and create some rigorous processes around both data and report governance to ensure that users aren't looking at data that's inconsistent or in conflict. You need a modern data architecture that's centered on a data refinery that takes in raw data and then processes it into a multiplicity of products that different types of users can use. And I'll show you a reference architecture for that. Finally, you need to deploy a whole range of self-service tools for both casual and power users. And you need a good dose of change management to ensure there is widespread adoption for change for self-service. And while you're at it, mastering both business intelligence and self-service intelligence, you really need to lay the foundation for mastering artificial intelligence. And I know a lot of companies are already working on these things, as they should be, a data lake or data lake house, as we're hearing now, streaming data in, not just in batches, but as events and with change data capture as well. Data science and data ops, which goes hand in hand in many cases with data science. It's the process of creating automated data pipelines to speed delivery and cycle times. And then finally, data literacy. So people know what you mean when you present charts and correlations and trends. They can accurately interpret what's being displayed as well as act on it. So if we go back to the keys for self-service, as I said, this forms the outline. I have a slide or two on each of these bullets here. We'll try and finish this up in no less than another 10 to 15 minutes. So we leave plenty of time to address your questions. So in terms of the Federated Organization, oh, this didn't quite build properly. What I've seen is that a lot of organizations start with silos, or they end up with silos, where each department is kind of doing its own thing. It's got its own people, its own tools, its own data. And that's great for the department, but it's not great for organizational data consistency. This kind of thing drives the CEO crazy and the CFO crazy. The CEO, because they can't get a simple answer, consistent answer to a simple question, like how many customers do I have? It drives the CFO crazy because of all the overhead and redundancy. So normally what they do is they take all the data and analytics people out of the departments and centralize them to achieve economies of scale and standardize the architecture and tooling, which makes a lot of sense. But as soon as you centralize things, you create a backlog. And IT is in control here, and everyone hates IT because they have to stand in line and wait for service. So that's really not acceptable. So finally, enlightened organizations will cut the difference and create a federated organization, which combines the best of the decentralized model, which is where data and analytics is close to the business, and the best of the centralized model, which is economies of scale and standardization, into a federated model, which has very little of the downsides of both of those two former models. So let me show you what that looks like. We've spent a number of years actually creating this framework for a federated center of excellence. And it's got a number of components here, and I'll just step through those. The first is the corporate data analytics team that's comprised of a lot of technical specialists sitting on their own teams, a platform team, a data engineering team, analytics team that does data science and data analysis, a BI reporting and development team that builds solutions for groups in the organization, a business support team that helps train advanced data literacy, maybe mans a help desk. And then they have agile SWAT teams that pull experts from these various other teams into a SWAT team that goes into each department or area of the company and builds out the infrastructure quickly using the standard data platform to meet the needs of the business units and departments that they can't do on their own or do easily or quickly. That's the corporate team. I think we're all pretty familiar with that team. Now, typically in the business units, this is where we create the silos. Business units who don't want to stand in line ended up hiring their own data analysts, sometimes even data engineers and data scientists, buying their own tools and databases and creating their own data warehouses or data marts. And the purpose here is to provide insights and reports and information to the business unit leaders and managers on demand. Now, what's really interesting about the federated model is what happens between these two groups. In a real federated model, there is a linkage between them, either a dotted line or a straight line. In fact, one of our clients right now actually owns all the analysts that happen to sit out in the business units. Great way to achieve alignment. In this case, with that client, they actually do hire, train, and evaluate the performance of those analysts while the departments give them their day-to-day work orders. The enterprise team also makes sure in the training that they convey best practices, that those analysts know how to use the standard tools, the data warehouse, they understand where the common metrics are, even the SQL for those things. And they do and provide ongoing coaching and support of those embedded analysts. In return, the analysts offload a lot of local development from the centralized team. They can help consolidate requirements that the local team actually can't address or are overwhelmed by, and then feed them up to the corporate group. And they can help train the business users in the field to do fishing on their own, to do more of the data analytics work on their own without even needing a data analyst, let alone an IT person. So that can be either a straight line or a dotted line relationship. We've seen it both ways. And that's where a lot of the power of this federated model comes from. But there are also other components. So above this is really the board of directors. It's a cross-functional oversight team or committees. Usually it's two committees, an executive committee and a working committee. And their job really is to approve the strategy and the funding, at least at the executive committee, for this enterprise program or center of excellence, however you want to call it. They also do a lot of work. Oftentimes, they'll be the group that prioritizes the strategic projects that come out of the business units and the enterprise groups. They may also be the ones who define standards and practices, or at least approve them, that all departments and business units should use, and many other things, including reviewing marketing and training programs, reviewing reports and changes to those reports, as we'll talk about in a second, to ensure data consistency at the enterprise level. The final component is what sits below. These are these cross-functional forums or communities of practice. It's really designed to help the people in the field, whether data analysts or business users, improve their data analytics competency. They can share tips and tricks and code in forums, both virtual and in person. They can learn what other people are doing through webcasts and newsletters and events. Kind of ground up type of pollination is really important to achieve success with data analytics on the enterprise scale. So that's the first bullet. The first key to success is the federated organization. And I'd love to know if any of you are doing something similar to this. The second bullet was about data and report governance. And I think a lot of you know about data governance. There's entire conferences about that topic in many, many books. Report governance doesn't get enough attention, but this is where the wheels go off the bus with self-service, I found. Below the dotted line here in the tan is where the power users sit, both the data analysts and the data scientists, and their job is to generate and publish insights for their team, their department, and oftentimes the rest of the organization. And that's great. They're pulling data from wherever they can and mashing it together, generating insights and publishing it. But the problem is if they publish it to people above the dotted line, the casual users, those folks want accurate, consistent data. They don't want to spend the entire meeting arguing over whose data is right. So if power users are going to publish data to casual users, their publication really needs to go through a data governance gateway. And first and foremost, that gateway consists of a data governance review process, where there is a team, maybe part of that council that we just talked about, that takes a look at proposed changes or even entire new reports to ensure that they conform with enterprise standards for data definitions, dimensions, visual layouts, as well as performance, whether the data is in fact in the enterprise data platform. Once it passes that review process, then it might go through a production handoff, whereas a report that a power user might develop in Excel, the company might want to produce it in the standard, like say, Tableau type tool. And oftentimes these tools like a Tableau or Power BI or TIBCO should incorporate the capabilities to do that promotion of a insight from a power user into that review process, and then certify that report and display that certification to all consumers of that report. So that's report governance. It's a very involved process, but can pay a lot of dividends if done right. Now, it's also important to have a strong data foundation and a data platform. And our data platforms are evolving as we speak. The cloud and big data have changed these dramatically for the better. This is Eckerson Group's reference architecture for a modern data platform. And we like to think of it as a data refinery that takes data from multiple sources, ingests it, and then integrates that data and produces a multiplicity of products in these different zones here. A landing zone for raw data, an integrated zone that tends to pull like data together into building blocks, sometimes wide flat tables. Developers take those building blocks and turn them into different consumable products by casual users. A dimensional zone, perhaps more like a data warehouse with trusted data, and a domain zone might support a specific department or a use case. On the right-hand side, we have both the casual users and power users with different types of capabilities provided by different types of tool sets. Casual users will eventually be able to see the data through various types of business views, whether it's semantic layer in a BI tool or a database view. The power users traditionally will go through a data catalog that indexes all the data in the refinery and perhaps elsewhere, provides metadata descriptions about those data sets and data objects and artifacts. And then through their data prep tool and access into the refinery through a sandbox, they can look at all that data and then start to pull it out and combine it, mash it together to create a custom data set they can then analyze, and then perhaps turn into a report that goes to that data governance gateway as we just talked about. Of course, underlying all of this is strong data management and administration capabilities, one set of services to support the whole environment so it's not fragmented and chopped up, as well as a data infrastructure increasingly in the cloud to support all of this. You might wonder, what is the relationship between a data refinery or data platform and self-service? Well, what I've seen is that the more robust your data platform, the more likely you're going to be able to support self-service. The easier that will be. And how is that? Well, you provide a data catalog to find the data, a lake to house any data, a refinery to create data products, sandbox to foster exploration, preparation to mash up data sets, and so on and so forth. So the first step really is to get your data platform, your data house in order to support self-service. Certainly not an easy step, but one that's really important. You got to lay a good foundation to build a good house. Of course, tooling is important as well. And there's all kinds of self-service tooling out there these days. Frankly, much of it is designed for power users. But if we start at the top here, reports and dashboards today are all AI driven, essentially putting a data analyst in the pocket of every business user out there through natural language queries, as well as automated insights, where a user who generates a query or a dashboard or looks at a chart, behind the scenes algorithms are kicking off to go search for and surface the most relevant correlations, trends, and anomalies in that little data set. And then the tools can be used to generate alerts and recommendations in real time, all without a data analyst having to do the work. Pretty interesting. On the power user side, we have visual analysis tools that really automate the process of turning data into visual data sets and charts and dashboards. We have data prep tools and data catalog tools that help data analysts find data and prepare it, combine it, clean it, match it up, and turn it into a data set that they can use to generate insights and use the visualization tools to present those insights to business users. On the advanced analytics side, we now have the advent of auto ML tools that enable citizens, data scientists, in other words, power users, to generate fairly advanced analytical models without a lot of statistical knowledge and experience. And then we also have quick embedding tools that make it a lot easier for developers to embed charts and reports and even entire self-service environments into applications where users do most of their work. And this is where analytics is moving towards the operational sphere. So users don't have to do a context switch from their work, their day-to-day work, into insights about that work. So that's all important in terms of self-service enabling the casual user. So we could talk for a long time about tools, but let me move to the final key, which is change management. This is a big area. There's lots to do here. The most basic things are creating a communications plan and a marketing plan that helps everyone who will be affected by the advent of a self-service program to understand what changes are coming, how it will affect them, and what they need to do. Also, key part of any change management is training curriculum to advance data literacy. But what I'm picturing here is something I'm calling cascading support, where in that federated organizational model, if you have all the groups working together from corporate down to the embedded analyst, they all start to help each other. So the corporate team can provide training and coaching to embedded data analysts, who in turn provide coaching and build local solutions to data explorers. Those are a type of casual users, a little bit more sophisticated than the average casual user. And those explorers in turn can coach data consumers, typically 60% of your workforce. And then in return, requests for data objects for analytical needs move back up the chain, up that ladder. So consumers send requests to explorers, who send them to data analysts, who might create prototypes or entire applications to meet those needs, or prototypes are sent to the corporate analytics team. And in the mix is a data analytics help desk, something that's dedicated to the data analytics unit that can handle break fixes, incidents, and help users learn better how to use tools on demand. So that's also a part of a data literacy training. Finally, I have a KPI for self-service, and that is your maturity in self-service is inversely proportional to the size of your request backlog. So the smaller the backlog, the more your users are self-sufficient, or they're just data dead, one or the other, I suppose. This little chart shows some of the things that you can do to reduce that backlog, and all of them are critical to improving self-service. So they range from developing standard KPIs and a data dictionary to house them, creating a core dashboard in every department, deploying self-service tools and literacy training, how to use those tools and interpret the data within them, a help desk, as we just talked about, embedded data analyst to provide support at the point of need in the departments, a data refinery with granular security, as we discussed, an enterprise sandbox with a data catalog, as we showed you as part of the data refinery, and data prep tools with the ability to create data sets, or automarts, as some people call them. And once you apply all those things, the number of requests should shrink quite dramatically, and all you're left with are the large strategic projects that should be prioritized by a strategic prioritization committee and then executed by an enterprise SWAT team, which usually is a multidisciplinary team that comes in and in 3 to 6 months knocks out a pretty important piece of infrastructure or analytics required to meet the business need. So that is the sum of my presentation today. I know it was a lot in a very short period of time. And to cap this off, we'd like to reintroduce our panel and then put up the poll. So here's our panel again. We're going to ask the panelists to show themselves with a video, which we like to do at this point in the presentation. And Deb is also presenting the new polls. So first poll is, which business roles in your organization are currently using self-service analytics today? Select all that apply. And 2, self-service analytics users at my company engage with data mostly through, and choose only the term you identify with most strongly: dashboards, reports, analytics applications, portals, or other. So take a minute to answer those. I'll turn my video on. All right, Deb, you want to show us the results? Okay. Number one, which business roles in your organization are currently using self-service? It looks like analyst, not surprisingly, is the most predominant role, followed by developer IT. A close tie for data scientist, business operations manager, and last, executive decision maker. In terms of self-service analytics users at my company engage with data mostly through reports, it looks like 40% there, followed by analytics applications, 28%, dashboards, 25%. Well, terrific. Thank you for responding so quickly to those polls. You might want to leave that one up there, Deb. I'm going to ask the panel now to comment on either one of the polls that we shared, if you have any comments about what you saw in the results, and then we'll move to what you thought of the presentation before we open this up to Q&A from the rest of the audience.
You know, Wayne, I was surprised to see data scientists as high as it is. You know, you often hear a lot of talk about how hard it is to get that type of skill set into your business, but a good portion of the folks obviously have access through data science. And I think it represents an interesting area around self-service analytics, that they have to be part of that community and that federated approach, because if they're not, you have a hard time getting your hands on some of that more advanced insight.
Right. Of course, I'm going to be a little bit skeptical. I wonder, you know, who those data scientists really are. We know they're hard to really find and secure, and they cost a lot. Do we have a little bit of title inflation, perhaps, which might explain the high percentage?
I always tell people if they'd like to get a raise, they should add data science to their LinkedIn profile. So I agree.
So you're guilty of the
my
great
suspicion
inflation
as well, Wayne. I was struck by the answer to the first question, how's your self-service initiative going? And the first option was excellent. Was chosen.
Ed, is it possible to put that poll back up?
Well, you know, the first answer, excellent, was 0. No one said excellent or great.
Yeah.
So, okay. So there's a lot of opportunities for improvement, or maybe some burning questions out there. And as moderator, I like to encourage people to use the Q&A button at the bottom, not the chat button, but Q&A. But we do have a couple of questions that have come in already. But before we jump to that, I'd like to hear if Sean had any commentary on the slides that you presented, Wayne, what his experience has been.
You know, on the first poll, you know, I watched it closely, and I wondered, you know, if anybody would say great. So I wasn't terribly surprised that the number one answer was okay. But the thing that surprised me more was in the second question around adoption. You know, these style of tools have been in the marketplace for quite a long time. And so I think adoption is a twofold sort of challenge. And one of them is the technology itself, the tool that you're using, is that highly adoptable? Does it get the attention of multiple personas in your analytic practice? I think that's an interesting challenge. And then even more so to what Wayne's been talking about, when you look at a federated center of excellence, for instance, it's part cultural. Adoption comes through that mentoring that Wayne talked about, and the coaching and the training. And I think a lot of that gets lost when companies shift to a self-serve model for analytics in general, that they think it's the magic button, the silver bullet. But I think if you don't have your people skills arranged correctly, your culture, which is really what the Federated Center of Excellence is about, is the right culture and the right tech. I think you need a balance of all three. And I wonder if that's the challenge to a lot of the folks that answered high on that adoption question. So I think it's a great question, but I think it bears digging into.
You know, we did a project for a university out in the far west, and we met with a whole bunch of business users in the different colleges. And a lot of them complained that this new self-service tool that they were given was just too hard to use, and they stopped using it. So I think especially in the earlier days of self-service, people would buy these tools and just buy licenses for everyone, and thinking that, well, this is what they want. We'll just give them a tool, they can service their own data needs. And it just doesn't work out that way. I mean, I usually start my self-service classes, which can range 6 hours, with talking about personas. I mean, you can't do self-service until you classify your business users into 4, 5, 6, or 7 categories with very defined attributes. Because until you know who you're trying to serve, you won't be able to serve them very well with whatever tool you give them.
No, I absolutely agree. And I also think that there's a foundational storyline here that's interesting. And you kind of touched around it when you spoke about the evolution of what we're seeing in this area. So when we look at, the reporting segment versus the business-led segment and the AI-led segment of sort of the evolution of these types of solutions, you referenced you have to have a few of these things in place in order to move to the next one. And I do think that a lot of companies are still struggling with having the right foundational, the right foundational technologies. And you've got a great list here, Wayne, whether it's, having your core dashboards and your data warehouse squared away the way you need it, or are you still dealing with data management issues? I mean, we didn't say this in the introduction, but Wayne and I have known each other for 20 years, I think, at this point. And we've both been writing on this subject matter for a very long time. And I said recently to a friend of ours that, that phrase of old things are new again is very relevant in our space. We used to write articles about data quality and data access and data integration 15, 20 years back. And some companies are still struggling with the foundational building blocks in order to move up, Wayne, your evolution track here, right? You have to have a few of these things in place. Otherwise, you can't move on.
Right. I presented this to a client and they're like, well, we're not going to wait. We still have to work on BI and self-service. But we don't want to wait to work on our data lake and data streaming until after those are done. And I told them, well, that's true. You shouldn't wait. You don't have to master each phase, each key in each phase before you start doing the keys in the next phase. In fact, you should be doing a lot of these all at once or along the way. So that's one caveat I wanted to mention.
Well, Wayne, if I can jump in with a couple of questions from the audience, I'm going to combine two, one from Greg, one from Chris. It seems like a lot of the topics you've been just talking about just now. One is data literacy is a significant gap, and how do you establish a program, or how do you make sure that data literacy is sufficient for the types of analytics going on? And along with that is a data platform question that says, how important is the semantic layer for the business definitions of the data? And establish that for self-service, or should self-service users have direct access directly to the data, the raw data?
Both good questions. Data literacy is the new buzzword, but it's all about training users in what the data means, how to interpret charts and tables, how to use the tools to do self-service. As I mentioned in that last slide, it's all about change management, and a big part of that is training. We're seeing a lot of companies develop curriculum around data literacy and tailoring that curriculum to the different personas that we just mentioned. And in some cases, creating a certification around that curriculum so that users have to take courses and pass the tests in those courses to advance their title, advance their rank, and more importantly, get access to various types of data and tools that they may want to use. But the caveat here is, no rights without responsibilities, right? So you have to prove that you know what you're doing before we give you free reign of the data with these types of tools, because you can do a lot of damage. Literacy plus certification, to me, seems like a big opportunity for many organizations. Mostly the certifications for data analysts and data scientists, the power users. And those folks definitely want a career path with different tiers that they can move up the ranks as quickly as possible. In fact, that's a topic for a different time, is career pathways in the data analytics field. Sean, do you have any thoughts on data literacy, or should we tackle the semantic layer? I know that one's near and dear to you.
I'll touch on the literacy question. I agree. It's a really hot buzzword, and it's one that gets bandied about quite a bit. I don't hear as much on the how do you actually enact a strategy around it. But I agree that if you are approaching it through the eyes of training and certification and kind of enlightenment with people that want to use these tools, I think that's a highly practical starting place. I think we'll see a lot more in the industry in general about best practices and recipes and frameworks to follow for creating data literate companies. But I do think that most smart companies understand that that's an investment that they need to make these days.
And what about semantic layer? I do get that question a bit. I mean, it's an old, quote unquote, older technology. You know, some people call it the business model or data model inside a BI tool, but it's still quite relevant. You know, it's kind of like the visual manifestation of a data mart, right? Now, most of your users, 60%, just want to look at the report or dashboard, but 30% want to go underneath what's on the dashboard in the report and open up that model, right? The business model, and kind of create their own modification to that report or dashboard, or create their own report or dashboard. And that model is critical to them doing that. Now, that technology has been out there for a long time, but I think it's still as relevant as ever to support business users. In fact, at a recent client, there was one group, the finance group, that was using a very traditional incumbent BI tool with a very rich semantic layer. And they were the only group inside the entire company that was self-sufficient because they had their data mart all designed and laid out. They had their semantic layer running against the data mart. And the enterprise BI team really didn't have to support them too much anymore because all that fundamental work was done. And I spend most of my time with clients helping them figure out how to do that same kind of work for all their other departments, which have not been serviced very well. So what have they done? They've gone out and hired a data analyst who's kind of fumbling around in the dark and in isolation without any data engineers to support them to build out the infrastructure they need to be much more productive. So these data analysts are basically turned into data heroes where they spend 80% of their time, you know, manually integrating data when that work should have already been done. So now I'm getting on a bandwagon here. I should probably stop, but we see this time and time again.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think, you know, a holistic view of being successful is important. And, you know, we look at it through kind of a couple of different filters. Having, you know, seamless and quick ability to connect to data, being able to unify it, orchestrate it, understand it, and then being able to leverage it for analytics is kind of a three-pronged approach. But I think when you look at all of what you've presented today, whether it's the evolution of data analytics or if it's the Federated Center of Excellence, all of these parts and pieces need to be there. So having access to a semantic layer or the model is going to be really important to a certain percentage of the persona that we serve. You know, I remember the first time I got my hands on a BI tool, and I was back in the day when things were small and they sent it to you on a set of floppy disks, and you know, you were left to your own devices. But if you want to scale in the enterprise analytics across your business, which is what most companies are trying to do, it requires a much broader approach, and you have to be able to, as I said, connect and unify data, and you have to be able then to put analytics on it in a smart way. So Wayne, what you're talking about in this question from the audience about semantic layers just highlights how important it is to have the right pieces for the right personas in order to scale your practice.
Now, we should say that for a power user or a bona fide power user, bona fide data analyst or data scientist, that semantic layer is very inhibiting, right? They're going to hit the boundaries of that semantic layer, you know, almost instantly. So you need a whole different approach to support your power users. And that's where the data prep tool, the data catalog, the data sandboxes, and the data refinery are really important. Because without those things, the power user is back to using Excel and Access and trying to beg and plead for data wherever they can get it.
Imagine if there were a tool that would be able to combine the meta layer, the semantic layer from multiple different tools. So you had to incorporate that into a data catalog. then you might be able to solve some of those go find it questions, and then have a sandbox, as Wayne mentioned earlier, to combine the data into whatever that specific purpose is.
Well, I do believe some catalogs can index schema, so that's a start.
Yep. Let me get to another branch, if you will, combining again two questions, one from Rupert, one from, I believe, Greg, about external data. Organizations bringing in external data. It's not in the warehouse yet. It's not in the catalog yet. How do you control that stuff? How do you govern that stuff? How do you make sure they don't abuse it? How do you deal with that?
Mark my words, 2020 is the year of external data. I mean, this has been a perennial pain point for a long, long time. You know, the purchase of this data is not usually centralized, so companies are buying way more than they should. You know, the quality of the external data sometimes is suspicious. Integrating that with your existing data is really hard. So this is something that I think vendors have awakened to, and the new cloud-based platforms, which are essentially multi-tenant in nature, really lend themselves to solving this problem. So you've already seen Snowflake and Amazon and a few others announce data exchanges. This is the way organizations are going to share data across company boundaries much more easily, either for a fee or for free or for as part of a partnership. So I think there is some solutions coming to this pain point in the near future.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, it's you know, as we've gotten off of this term of big data that used to be such a hot and perennial favorite of everybody's, it really just sort of distilled down to all the data you need. And once companies start to make or get traction on dealing with their data lake and their data streams and the rest of the data they need in-house, they very naturally look outside to, you know, to augment analytic models and to augment insights with different outside sources of data. And I think these data marketplaces and data services are going to continue to proliferate. And then I guess it goes back to the idea, and you check two of my big boxes, Wayne. One is, you know, cloud makes it super easy to do these things, and we certainly see that. Being open as an open platform, being open to different types of data. You know, you mentioned purchasing data, Wayne, but, you know, we can't forget all of the public data that's out there and open government data that's very interesting right now. So having an openness to your environment and with the tools and the ability to connect everything is certainly important. And then lastly, you know, you have to have a foundation of AI and all of these tools and processes. So we're starting to see that with the traditional data preparation people, the data quality people, and the analytics folks, us, TIPCO included, are making sure that we're infusing or creating a foundation of AI inside the solutions to help expedite some of these processes. So you make a good point, but it's part of that opportunity of having every single bit of data you want in your enterprise. But you were right off the top. It's bought by multiple locations. It's not centralized. It's difficult to manage. And it's something that companies will struggle with for the next few years.
Yeah, I'll go back to another couple of questions that touched on the topic of making sure we're consistent when people do self-service. And I'd like to start with my own experience is that if you have enterprise KPIs and you're going to align on performance measures, distribute those across the organization, and then people can do whatever they want and put those in various contexts to answer their individual business questions. But I also find if people develop their own reports that are very similar to other enterprise reports that are out there, as one questioner mentioned, they might get it wrong. And my experience is that that will be self-correcting. If they get it wrong, they will become embarrassed or exposed at some point in time. And they'll learn to be more careful or to build on what's already existing and certified in the future. So I tend to view that as, you know, somebody's going to blow a hole in their foot, they're going to blow a hole in their foot, and then they're going to get wiser, and other people will see that happen, and they'll be cautious going forward as well.
You know, that I think that's the definition of a data silo, which is you embed the logic inside a report or a local data set. And once that happens, all hell breaks loose and self-service really implodes. So as you notice, Jed, you'll like this. The first step towards reducing your data backlog, which really is the same thing as embracing self-service, is to define standard KPIs, document them, put them in a data dictionary, make it very accessible to all business users, ideally through a right click from a report. But yeah, once you got to standardize your metrics and your business logic, and you can't have self-service without standards. And the biggest standard is, what do you mean when you say this? What does this metric mean? What does this term mean? Unless the organization can agree on those things and document it, and even, save the SQL code that supports that in a central place, you're always going to have different readings of the data that causes conflict and swamps any data and analytics initiative. So yeah, that's the first step. I agree wholeheartedly with you, Jed.
How about some of the more sophisticated users? There are always people who are aspiring to get better. And how far can some of these tools go? Are there some tools that can handle the basics and extend all the way into auto ML and auto AI or augmented intelligence? And how should users think about the proliferation of tools and finding the best set of tools for the job or for the organization? Bring your own tool, all those kinds of things.
I'm going to take a first pass, but I know Sean wants to talk about that one. So what we're seeing is a unification of data analytics capabilities. In fact, I just wrote a report on that. It's called Unified Data and Analytics Platforms, UDAP. It's the wave of the future. So all vendors are realizing they kind of have to be all things to all people. So if you're an analytics vendor, you're supporting everything from reporting to advanced analytics and beyond. You're a data vendor, you're supporting everything from data quality and data cleansing to master data management, on data integration and beyond. And now vendors are starting to put those two worlds together into a UDAP product. So then the question becomes, do you want to get all that functionality from one vendor and one product, or do you want to go best of breed? That age-old question. But I'm sure, Sean, you have some thoughts on that notion.
Yeah, I certainly do, and I think at TIPCO we do collectively. The personas have changed a lot over the last couple of years, and it created a real, greenfield opportunity that existed alongside of BI and reporting tools and these advanced data science workbenches. And I think smart vendors understand that the different personas have a demand to blend them. And we certainly do that with our products in an ability to put data science and models inside of our Spotfire product. But we also have, more data science oriented products for the pure blood data science persona. But you have to have, I think, a blend, and you do have to be able to cater to the needs of more prolific and advanced users. We have tons of users who are looking to implement streaming data into self-service. They want to utilize analytic models that are written by data scientists and slide those into their analysis. And it's a complete blending of that world. And I don't think there's anything we can do to stop it. I think that it's well underway, and it's a challenge to anybody in the industry to serve this wider scaling group of self-serve people. The demands get higher all the time. But yeah, to your point, there's a complete blending of what we used to call like advanced analytics or AI and auto ML and those types of things with the tools that used to be more just data visualization or dashboarding tools. And you have to bring those things together for this growing community of diverse users. So yeah, it's a fun challenge. I think it's an exciting part of what's happening in our space.
Well, thank you, Sean, and thank you, Wayne. We're just about at the top of the hour, and I want to thank everyone for attending and joining us and sending your questions. Unfortunately, we couldn't get to all of them, but we will try to direct you to some of the resources on our website where we think some of your questions could be answered in more detail. We also will send a follow-up email with links to the ebook that we mentioned at the top and the slides that Wayne presented and a replay of this webinar. We hope you found this to be a good use of your time. If you did, please feel free to forward the links. And if you use social media, we'd appreciate a mention. And finally, if you have any feedback for us, please send it directly to wayne@eckerson.com. Thank you, everyone. Please stay healthy and safe, and we look forward to having you in our next community forum. Take care.